Meteorologists don't advertise this, but if you line up NOAA's Storm Prediction Center data next to a map of Florida, you'll notice something the evening news never mentions. This state gets hit by more tornadoes per square mile than almost anywhere else in the country, and yet some towns have gone decades without a single one touching down. Pinellas County alone has logged over 130 tornado touchdowns since 1950. Some towns 20 minutes away haven't recorded one in years. That gap isn't random. It comes down to coastline shape, land width, and a little bit of dumb luck. And once you see the pattern, you'll never look at Florida real estate the same way again. This is 11 Florida towns where tornadoes almost never touch down, backed by NOAA storm records, FEMA's National Risk Index, and the county-by-county numbers that prove the gap is real. We've got an island chain so narrow that a tornado physically can't stay alive long enough to reach it. A rural county that FEMA ranks as having the lowest combined natural disaster risk in the entire state. A retirement community that sat at the edge of the deadliest tornado outbreak in Florida history and then rebuilt an entire region around making sure it never happened again. And a fishing village where waterspouts spin up constantly and somehow never make it to shore. If this keeps you out of a mobile home in the middle of Dixie Alley, the least you can do is hit subscribe. Let's count it down. Number 11, Clewiston. Locals call it the sweetest town in America because U.S. sugar has been headquartered here since the 1930s, and the smell of cane syrup drifts over the town during harvest season. About 7,000 people live here on the southern shore of Lake Okeechobee, sitting well inland from both coasts. That matters more than people realize because most Florida tornadoes spin up when the Gulf sea breeze and the Atlantic sea breeze collide somewhere over the peninsula's narrow center. Clewiston sits far enough south and far enough from that collision line that it mostly misses the fight. The trade-off is Lake Okeechobee itself. The Herbert Hoover Dike holds back a massive body of water, and hurricane flood risk here is a real separate conversation from tornado risk. Number 10, Mayo. This is the seat of Lafayette County, Florida's least populated county at around 8,500 residents, tucked into the Suwannee Valley in the state's rural interior. Mayo sits far from both coastlines, which keeps it out of the sea breeze convergence zone that fuels most Florida tornadoes. Historical touchdown counts here are about as low as it gets. Full honesty though, part of that low number is simply that there's almost nobody around to report a tornado that touches down in a hayfield. Low population means low reporting, not necessarily zero weather. Number 9, Cedar Key. This is a tiny fishing island on the Nature Coast with fewer than 800 people, and when I looked into its tornado history, the pattern was obvious. The island is so narrow that a tornado essentially runs out of land before it can build real structure. Most of the rotation off this coast shows up as a waterspout, a weak spinning column over open water that dissipates before ever reaching a dock. Cedar Key has old Florida charm, clapboard buildings, and a seafood industry that's been running for generations. The catch is storm surge. Being a low, narrow island protects you from tornadoes and makes you extremely exposed to a completely different disaster. Number 8, Live Oak. The Suwannee County seat sits along the I-10 corridor in Florida's rural north, far from the coastal sea breeze collision zone that drives most of the state's tornado activity. That distance buys real protection during the summer convective season, but winter and early spring tell a different story. Live Oak sits close enough to the tail end of Dixie Alley that squall lines riding cold fronts can still spin up tornadoes here, just on a completely different calendar than the rest of the state. Number 7, Perry. Taylor County sits on the Big Bend, the stretch of coastline where Florida curves gently instead of jutting into the Gulf. That curve matters because it spreads storm energy out along a wide, shallow coastline instead of concentrating it the way a sharp peninsula does. Perry has historically recorded far fewer tornado touchdowns than the Panhandle towns to its west. But don't get too comfortable. Hurricane Idalia made a direct landfall here in 2023 as a major hurricane, proving that low tornado risk and low hurricane risk are two completely different scorecards. Number 6, Marathon. Out in the Middle Keys, the physics work the same way they do at Cedar Key, just more extreme. The islands are so slender that a tornado has almost no land to organize over, and the wind shear coming off open water tends to tear apart rotation before it ever makes landfall. Marathon's tornado record is remarkably quiet for a place surrounded by warm water. The catch, and it's a big one, is that the Keys remain one of the most hurricane-exposed strips of land in the entire country. You're trading one hazard for a much bigger one. If any of these towns are catching you off guard, go ahead and hit like. It helps this video reach people who are quietly researching where to buy in Florida without gambling on the weather. And subscribing means you catch next week's breakdown too. Now the top 5 is where the data actually gets interesting. Number 5, Lake Butler and Union County. FEMA's National Risk Index has rated Union County as having the lowest combined natural hazard score of any county in Florida, sitting in roughly the 11th percentile nationally. Lake Butler, the county seat, has about 5,300 residents and sits inland, away from both coasts and away from the I-4 corridor's collision zone. That combined score factors in far more than tornadoes, so it isn't a tornado-specific ranking, but the underlying reasons are the same ones driving every entry on this list: distance from convergence zones and low overall severe weather history. Number 4, LaBelle. Hendry County's seat sits inland in South Florida, surrounded by citrus groves and cattle ranches, far from both the I-4 corridor and the Southeast Florida tornado hotspot around Palm Beach and Miami-Dade, which together account for a huge share of the state's tornado activity. LaBelle mostly stays out of that fight. The exception is hurricane season, when outer rain bands sweeping off the Gulf or up from the Everglades can still spin up brief, weak tornadoes on the fringes of a bigger storm. Number 3, Apalachicola. This is where geography really splits the panhandle in two. The western panhandle around Pensacola and Panama City has one of the highest tornado incidence rates in the state. Apalachicola sits in the eastern half, on the Big Bend, where oyster boats still work Apalachicola Bay, and the historic downtown feels frozen somewhere in the 1950s. Tornado touchdowns here are historically rare compared to towns just a few hours west. Hurricane Michael in 2018 came ashore nearby as a catastrophic Category 5, which is a reminder that this coastline's real threat is wind and surge, not rotation. Number 2, Wauchula. Hardee County sits in a genuine geographic dead zone between two of Florida's biggest tornado generators, the I-4 corridor to the north and the Southeast Florida hotspot to the south. Wauchula is deep in citrus and cattle country, far enough from both danger zones that it rarely shows up in tornado outbreak reports. When storms do reach this far inland, they've usually already lost the structure that made them dangerous closer to the coast. The exception is a landfalling hurricane's outer bands, which can still tag the area with a brief, weak spin-up. Number 1, The Villages. On the night of February 2, 2007, one of the deadliest tornado outbreaks in Florida history tore through Lake and Sumter counties, killing 21 people, many of them in manufactured housing that never stood a chance against direct hits in the dark. It happened only a few miles from where The Villages was in the middle of its expansion. Instead of treating it as bad luck and moving on, Sumter, Lake, and Marion counties spent the years afterward rewriting manufactured home wind codes and investing heavily in FEMA-rated community safe rooms and shelter networks. Today, The Villages sits inside one of the densest severe weather shelter systems in the state, with automated alerts that go out the moment rotation is detected on radar. Geography didn't save this stretch of central Florida in 2007. Preparation did. And that's the real lesson buried in this entire list. Tornado safety in Florida was never just about which town the storms happened to miss. It's about which towns got serious about building for the ones that don't. If you made it to number 1, you're clearly someone who actually researches before they buy a house. Subscribe, because we break down the smartest and safest places to live in America every single week. Hit like if any of these surprised you, and drop a comment with which one you'd actually move to. I'll see you in the next one.